I've been replaying this night in my head for a few years now. It happened back in December of 2019, just a couple of days before Christmas. I was 16 years old, a teenage girl who thought she had a decent sense of judgment, one who believed that she could read people well enough to know when something was off. I was wrong. Now, I wasn't attacked, I wasn't physically harmed, but the more I think about the way things unfolded, the more I realize how easily that it could have gone another way, and how calculated someone can be without you even realizing it in the moment. I live in a big Northern American city. This particular night, I'd been hanging out with a group of friends who lived in a different part of town. Once we said our goodbyes, I ended up heading for the subway alone. It was winter cold, kind that hits your face like needles, and it was already dark out. When I boarded the train, the car I was on was nearly empty, just a handful of scattered passengers. I picked one of the single seats, the kind with another seat positioned perpendicular to it, facing you. The other seat was empty, so I settled in, checked my phone, and figured the ride would be quiet. But a couple of stops in, a guy gets on the train who didn't hesitate to look around for another seat. He just beelined it to the empty chair beside mine and sat down as if we'd already been talking. This guy was tall, slim, chestnut hair parted neatly down the middle. Clean sweater and jeans, not overdressed, but well put together. He looked like the kind of guy that you might think was cute if you were 16 and didn't know any better. He greeted me with a hello and a smile, staring directly at me. I smiled back, which was a polite reflex, and he gave me his name. He asked how my night was going, made a little small talk, and casually mentioned that he'd just finished school. This prompted me to ask him how old he was. 24, he said. I told him then that I was 16, something that should have raised a red flag for him, but he didn't even blink. There was no awkward pause or change in tone, and if anything, the corners of his mouth lifted like he found it amusing. He said something to the effect of him missing being that age, and he also advised me to stay in school. Looking back on it, I think that was the first moment that something felt strange. It didn't take long for him to start asking me questions. Why was I alone? What I had been up to before getting on the train? Did I have any plans after this? I foolishly told him no. That's when he told me about this dare that he had from his friends, about bringing a random girl to a party that they were having, and that he wanted me to be that girl. I laughed and told him no. I said that my mom would be upset, and that I needed to get home, but he just wouldn't drop it. He leaned in slightly, elbows resting on his knees, and his voice pitched just low enough that it felt like a private conversation. He said that it would be fun, promised that he wouldn't keep me long, said that if I got uncomfortable that he'd bring me right back to the station. He kept layering on reasons until my own nose started to sound flimsy in my own head. And here's the thing, he never pushed physically. He didn't touch me, didn't raise his voice. He just kept talking and smiling, making it all sound casual, harmless. Eventually, he broke me down and I said yes, something that I kick myself about even now. We rode a few more stops together before getting off in an area of town that I didn't recognize. The train platform was pretty much completely empty, and when we climbed the stairs to street level, the air felt heavier somehow. The neighborhood was quieter than the one I'd come from. Dim streetlights casting long shadows over the street. A couple of groups lingered outside corner stores, their breath visible in the cold. Later, I'd find out that this was a rough part of the city, one known for drugs, prostitution, and overall poverty. I didn't know it then, but I did know that I felt uneasy. As we walked, he told me that the name that he'd given me earlier on the train wasn't his real one. Okay, weird. Now he said that his name was Brian. It didn't sound any more believable given that he had lied before. And then came the personal questions. What are some of your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What do you find to be most stressful? Even at 16, I found these questions weird, and I tried to keep my answers vague, telling him that school was my main stress mostly, but he pushed, saying that there had to be more than that. He said he liked getting to know people, beyond just the surface stuff. I didn't realize it then, but it feels now like he was looking for weaknesses. So we'd been walking maybe 15 minutes when a car slowed down beside us. The driver leaned over and called out, "Hey," but Brian immediately waved him off. The car idled for a second before rolling off. As it did, Brian turned to me and said, "That was a John." I wasn't exactly familiar with the term, and he was quick to explain that it meant someone looking for a sex worker. And that made my stomach tighten even more. Eventually, we got to a townhouse that looked ordinary from the outside. There was warm light glowing from the windows, a neat shoveled driveway. Inside, there were 5 or 6 men, all much older than me. Most looked to be 20 to 25, but there were 2 that could have been 30 or older. Every single one of them stared at me. One asked how old I was, and when I said 16, another one of them muttered, "Come on, man, that's my sister's age." But instead of acting concerned, they all just laughed. After that initial awkwardness, we all sat around a dinner table. The host served up plates of food, but I didn't eat. My appetite was all but gone, replaced with this growing tightness in my chest. Other than asking how Brian and I had met, no one ever really spoke to me beyond that. Once dinner was wrapped up, everyone seemed to drift upstairs. Apparently, most of the people here were musically inclined in some way. Brian grabbed up a guitar. Another guy sat at a keyboard and they started playing. They handed me Brian's phone and asked me to film them. I stood there recording for a while, but the whole time, I was hyper aware of my surroundings. The narrow hallway behind me, the sounds of footsteps around me, the fact that I didn't know anyone here and no one in my life knew where I was. I put the phone down and my uneasiness caused me to move toward the door. That's when one of the older men stepped into the doorway, leaning his arm against the frame. He asked if I was having fun. He said that he was an accountant, and the way that he shifted his weight forward, which wasn't enough to touch me, but enough to make me take a step back, felt deliberate, like he was trying to block my exit. I didn't say anything. I just eased past him, walked down the stairs, and made my way to the front door. It was unlocked, so I opened it, took a step out into the cold winter air, and took a few deep breaths. I didn't realize until then, but Brian followed me out. I fully expected him to try to talk me back inside, but instead, all he asked was, "Do you want to leave?" I said yes. As we walked back toward the subway, I told him my mom had been calling me nonstop and was worried. He didn't question it. Instead, he chose to ask if I was really 16, not younger, and told me that if he were my dad, he'd never let me out of his sight again. Then he called what I'd done the act of coming with him the dumbest thing he'd ever seen a girl do. When we got back to the station, he asked me one more question. He asked if I used Snapchat or Instagram. I told him I did, but only a little bit. I tried to use this as an excuse to not give him my usernames. But instead of asking for them, all he did was say, "You shouldn't use those. They're bad for girls your age." I asked him if he used them. He said, "No, I like to stay off the grid." That was that. He left me at the top of the stairs of the subway, and as I walked down them, that was the last I ever saw of Brian. But looking back, I keep thinking about the layers of this. The way he actively ignored my age while on the train. The lies about his name. Taking me to a neighborhood with a bad reputation. That quote-unquote house party. If I hadn't decided to walk out when I did, or if the door had been locked, I think that things could have unfolded much differently. At best, this was reckless on my part. At worst, it was the edge of something that could have been really sinister. In the time since, I've learned that predators don't always grab you off the street. Sometimes they just keep talking until no feels harder to say than yes. They'll smile. They make it sound like an adventure, and by the time you realize how far you've gone, you're already somewhere you shouldn't be. I got lucky that night, but luck isn't a plan. If someone makes you uncomfortable, whether it's with words, questions, or where they're steering you, listen to that feeling. Because once you're in too deep, walking away isn't always as easy as it was for me. When I was about 19, I was all over dating apps. Tinder, OkCupid, you name it. I had pretty low self-esteem at the time, and honestly, I really just wanted to connect with someone. So when I got a message on OkCupid from this guy, let's call him Brent, I was open to it. Brent seemed great on paper. He liked a lot of the same things I did. Video games, some nerdy hobbies, even some of the same shows and books. He wasn't creepy or overbearing in his messages, and I figured, why not? We live in a pretty small city, so it wasn't weird that he looked vaguely familiar to me. I just assumed maybe I'd seen him around before. We set a date for Red Lobster. I know, kind of a funny choice, but as mainly broke college kids, it seemed like a nice restaurant. I don't even like seafood, but I wasn't going to be picky about it. When the day came, I made sure I looked nice, but not overdressed. Something casual yet put together. I got to the meeting spot expecting to see the guy from the photos. And sort of. But he looked different. Not in a bad angle kind of way, but in a hasn't showered, probably hasn't shaved in a week kind of way. His clothes looked like they had just been pulled out of the laundry basket from the needs washing pile. I told myself not to be judgmental though. Maybe he had a rough day. I did my best to keep an open mind. We sat down, got our menus, the first basket of Cheddar Bay biscuits, and I decided that I'd order chicken. Like I said, I'm not into seafood. And that's when he made it weird. The server came over, I ordered, and Brent actually let out this loud, frustrated sigh in front of the server. Then he flat out told me he'd brought me to a seafood restaurant for a reason, and couldn't believe I'd order the chicken. I tried to laugh it off and explain I wasn't a fan of seafood, but he just kept going on and on about it. It was awkward, unnecessary, and I could feel people at the tables around us glancing over. After that, the mood was pretty much all but dead. We finished the meal, both obviously checked out on this date. I figured we'd say a quick goodbye in the parking lot and maybe a polite thanks before never seeing each other again. But that's not what happened. When we walked back to my car, he suddenly flipped the switch. Like that awkward dinner had not just happened. He kept leaning in close, brushing his arm against mine and trying to make small talk. Then came the attempts to kiss me. More than one. I dodged each time, laughing awkwardly, but he wasn't taking the hint. It turned into this long, drawn-out goodbye where I kept inching toward my car door, and he kept trying to find ways to keep me there. I finally managed to leave, but when I got home, my phone was blowing up. I braced myself for some snarky text about the chicken thing. Instead, it was much more intense. He sent me message after message about how perfect I was, how we were meant to be together, and how he couldn't wait for our next date. It threw me for an insane loop because we had been on one awkward dinner date, and he was already acting like he'd found the one. I didn't respond. I figured I'd talk to my roommate the next day and get her take on it. I didn't want to be cruel and just block him immediately, but I definitely wasn't interested. My roommate told me flat out, block him. I didn't listen. Huge mistake on my part. For the next few days, the texts didn't stop rolling in. He kept talking about how we were statistically perfect for each other, referencing some compatibility quiz from OkCupid. He said we were logistically ideal, and it was basically inevitable that we'd end up together. I tried politely telling him I wasn't interested, but he brushed it off like I was joking. He'd send things like, "You'll see someday," or "I'll help you understand." Then, one night, in the middle of one of these one-sided text conversations, he sends, "I'm outside." Before I could even make sense of it, there was a knock on my bedroom window. I froze. My heart was in my throat. I texted back asking what the hell he was doing, and he replied, completely casually by the way, that he worked for my apartment complex, doing maintenance and janitorial work. That's when it clicked for me. The reason that he looked familiar the first time I saw him was because I knew him from the apartment complex. He'd recognized me from the very beginning. This wasn't a situation where a bad date spiraled into a stalker. He had already been watching me. He admitted in his messages that he always knew we'd end up together. This is something he wasn't joking about. The guy was dead serious about it. I snapped. I sent this long, angry message telling him to leave me alone, threatening to involve the police, making it clear that I wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. His response? I was just being silly. I was stubborn. According to him, we were inevitable, and my refusal was like denying gravity. He was this bizarre mix of overly affectionate and completely condescending, as if my own feelings about my safety didn't matter because he'd already decided how things were meant to go. I blocked his number, but that only made things worse. Now, he wasn't just texting. He was showing up at my window more and more often. Tapping, knocking, sometimes full-on hitting it. I'd hear footsteps outside, but no knock, leading me to think that sometimes he would just stand out there. Eventually, I went to my landlord. I know I should have done it earlier, but at the time, I still had the mindset of, this isn't bad enough to involve other people. My landlord spoke to him, and thankfully, that slowed things down. Not long after, I moved from that complex, and that was the end to it. No more knocks, no more texts. It's been over 10 years now, but I still think about this sometimes. How younger me just wanted to brush this off as a weird date. How I purposefully ignored the signs. And how quickly someone from the apps turned into someone who knew where I slept. So Brent, my stalker date, I can only hope that we never run into each other ever again. Not at my door, not outside my window, not in the next decade, not in any lifetime. I live in a relatively big Australian city, but once you leave the center of it, it's pretty much all bushland and trees. When I was in year 3, around 7 or 8 years old for my folks in America, my school took the entire class on a trip to a campground about 45 minutes out of town. It was a one-night trip and we were all super excited to go. After a long day of archery, basketball, tennis, and all the other things that come on camping trips, we had dinner and went to bed. I distinctly remember laughing and messing around with all my friends before we fell asleep at around 11 p.m. Now, the next part of this, I had forgotten for years, until only recently it came back up in my mind. And now it's the clearest part of the memory. I used to be terrified of the dark, and I used to wake up multiple times a night because of it. This certain instance, I woke up in my cabin at around 2 a.m. I remember this because I had a watch that was very special to me, and for some reason, looking at it and checking the time comforted me in the dark. When I woke up, something felt strange. Not wrong necessarily, but off. I looked around my cabin and saw nothing of interest, but then I was struck with this intense urge to just look out the window. It was right next to my bed. Our room was on the second level of this cabin complex, so when you looked out the window, you had to look down to see the ground directly below you. When looking out the window, I saw nothing, and just when I started to look away, something flashed and caught my eye. I could have sworn I saw something right beneath the window, almost out of sight if you were simply looking forward. I looked down, and I saw a person. Now, this wasn't what I would call an average person. This looked more like a tweaker, although as an 8-year-old, I'm not exactly sure I knew what that meant. He was tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", and his skin looked like he had just fallen hard on cement. This guy looked to be covered in scrapes or wounds, and his hair had been all buzzed off. He looked like he was about 40, but I think he may have been in his mid-20s based on his super skinny build. He wore this dirty black hoodie and black jeans that looked like motorbike pants. He also wore what looked like a mix between a fedora and a cowboy hat. Now, while I was looking down studying him, his eyes looked up and caught mine instantly. He was staring into the window. He didn't move his head there when he saw me. No, he had been actively staring into that window before I was even there. He had such a wide-eyed stare that I could have sworn he was straining all the muscles in his face to pop his eyes out as much as possible. The second we locked gazes, I ducked back down and hid under the covers. I wanted to scream and yell, tell my friends, but I was so scared that I couldn't even move. I waited under those covers for what felt like hours, until I finally felt like I was safe. I slowly peeked out from under the covers again and checked the window once more. He had moved a bit to the right, but he was still there, staring intently at my window. I didn't even get to become fully level with the window before I ducked out of sight again and went back to my hiding spot under the covers, whimpering. I'm not sure how, but I managed to fall back asleep. Once fully awake myself, I checked the window again, praying that this man was gone, and luckily he was. I told all my friends about it that morning, and they all laughed at me, thinking I had a nightmare. Although in their minds, the hilarious part was that I believed this nightmare. I forgot about all of this for about 10 years, but when it came back to me the other week, I realized that it couldn't have been a dream. Everything about it was so real. I have odd dreams on occasion, but those never actually make any sense. My dreams also flow pretty weirdly, so the absolute consistency is almost proof to me that this actually happened. Also, I specifically remember lying under my covers for ages, something that I doubt would happen in a dream. Same thing with looking at a watch. I have no idea who that was outside my window or what exactly he was doing. I just hope that he's not still out there doing that exact same thing, because that look in his eyes told me that whatever he was doing there, he wasn't messing around. I don't know exactly what I saw, but I just wish I had some sort of an answer. Let me start with the basics here. I'm a 26-year-old guy and I work alone in a small store that sells blinds. My shift is 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday. It's actually a pretty uneventful job. Most days I'm just on my computer, handling the occasional customer, putting together quotes for the few people who come in. It's quiet, repetitive, and nothing strange ever really seems to happen. Well, that used to be the case. About a week ago, I noticed something odd going on across the street. In one of the windows of this 8-floor apartment building, someone had set up a telescope. That's not inherently odd, but it wasn't pointed at the sky. It was aimed directly at my desk. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, but the more I paid attention, the more obvious it became. Every time I glanced over at it, that telescope was pointed right at me. Now, I don't handle cash in the store. All of our transactions are on card, so I doubt that this is someone casing the place for a robbery. I don't have anything to prove that necessarily, but this just feels more personal. Well, one day, I decided to test my suspicion. I set my phone up to secretly record myself working for about an hour and a half. When I watched the footage back later, my stomach dropped. In the video, I could clearly see the telescope moving slightly whenever I moved away from my desk, as if the person on the other end of it was adjusting it to keep me in frame. When I stepped away to use the restroom, the telescope shifted. When I went to the coffee machine to freshen up my mug, it moved to find me again. I've never seen who's behind it, just that unsettling black tube aimed straight at me, tracking my movements for 10 hours a day. I don't know what to do about it, but it racks my nerves every time I think about it. Update 1. Big thank you to everyone who commented here. I didn't expect this much attention, but here's a little extra information that people have been asking for. The view into my store is through the open doorway, so lowering the blinds on our windows wouldn't help. After realizing this, I ended up moving my desk closer to a wall to get out of the telescope's line of sight. That's a change I only made after I'd gathered enough video evidence of what was happening. I also only became of this stalker last Tuesday. I have no idea how long this has been going on, but now I'm a bit extra careful when leaving work at night. Following some advice that some commenters left, I decided to speak with the property manager of the apartment building across the street. Let's call her Anna. and I wanted to show her the footage. I plan to do this today, so if anything happens over the weekend, I'll be happy to update again on Monday. Update 2. I showed Anna the videos, and she was shocked. Even more so when she actually looked across the street from my desk and saw the telescope with her own eyes. According to Anna, the apartment that it's coming from is rented by 2 young women, maybe in their early 20s. And in her own words, she described the 2 girls as odd. She said she rarely sees them leave the apartment. All of their meals and groceries are delivered through some app, and the only other regular visitor is a man who shows up every couple of nights and leaves early in the morning. This man is actually the one who signed the lease and pays the rent. When he moved the girls in about 2 months ago, he claimed that they were moving in to be closer to school. But Anna says she's never once seen them go to class or even leave the apartment during typical school hours. She agreed that it was strange and told me she'd bring it up with both the building owner and the man who signed the lease so that this would stop. I'm yet to hear anything further, but the moment I do, I'll be sure to let you guys know. Final update, I think. I've been off work the last couple of days, and I try not to think about it when I'm on my weekend. So when I came back to work Monday, I immediately noticed that something was different. The apartment window, which had always been open up until this point, was now shut, and that telescope was nowhere to be seen. I texted Anna to see if she'd heard anything. She told me that she, the building owner, and the man who rented the place had a brief conversation on Saturday. They called him to specifically address my concerns, but they presented it as the building having just learned that the girls were harassing businesses across the street. Thankfully, they didn't mention me directly. The man listened attentively while Anna spoke her piece. He seemed to take the warning seriously. But then something happened that turned the entire conversation on its ear. The building owner asked one simple question. By the way, what are the girls studying? Anna said that the man's attitude changed instantly. He told them to mind their own business before quickly figuring out a reason to end the call. Well, the very next day, Sunday, that man shows up bright and early in Anna's office to hand over the keys to the apartment. He didn't explain why. He didn't even explicitly say that the girls had left. He just handed her the keys and walked away. Anna says that she never saw the girls leave, but assumes that they must have gone early in the morning before she arrived at work. There was no damage to the apartment, nothing stolen. Anna also didn't hear any noise or commotion the night before. Now she's considering filing a police report, just because the whole situation feels strange. Personally, I think the only reason that those girls vanished so suddenly is because of that one question, asking what the girls were supposedly studying. And that's what makes this entire thing even more unsettling. It's like that guy didn't want anyone asking questions about those girls. If Anna does go to the police, I'll give my statement if it helps. But honestly, I'd be perfectly fine never finding out what was really going on in that apartment. Because as time goes on, I can't imagine it being anything good.